Today is Monday, is November the 28th, 2022, and we are coming to you with today's devotional titled, Living in the Midst of a World Gone Mad. Now, our scripture reading is Titus chapter 3 and 1 Peter chapter 1. Well, I decided to devote the attention of this video devotional to Titus chapter 3 as we sum up the study of that brief letter from Paul the Apostle to Titus. Well, after challenging Titus regarding the character and virtues of men he would ordain to the ministry in chapter 1, Paul warned Titus concerning those who would oppose the gospel. And he described them in chapter 1 and verse 12 of the book of Titus as liars, evil beasts, and slow bellies, meaning lazy gluttons. Well, in chapter 2 of Titus, the apostle also charged that man regarding the spiritual character of those who were in the membership of the church. And you're going to find in verses 2 through verse 6 that Paul addresses and describes the spiritually minded aged men, the aged women in verse 3, the young women in verses 4 and 5, and finally the young men in verse 6. Now, knowing believers of the church would be a reflection of their spiritual leaders, Paul challenged Titus concerning his demeanor, his personal demeanor before the churches, and the character and the tone of his speech. He was urged to conduct himself. Titus, now being the leader over the churches in Crete, was challenged by and urged by Paul to conduct himself in such a way that any who might oppose him at least would not have substance or no evil thing to say, according to verse 8. Now, so much more might be said, but we're going to focus on the first two verses of Titus chapter 3. Now, the focus of Titus chapter 3 was the life and testimony of believers in that day, in the first century. Now, the first century world might surprise you in the sense that it was really not much different from our own. If you had lived in the world of the first century in the Roman society, you would have found, like the politicians and the bureaucrats of the 21st century, the Roman Empire was plagued with government corruption, gross injustices, high taxes to support Rome's vast armies. In addition, the Caesars, the governors of Rome's territories, were infamously immoral, and the bloody spectacle of gladiator fights was employed to feed the demand of the masses for entertainment. Does that not sound much like our own day? Well, as you look at Titus chapter 3 and verse 1 and 2, let's pick up that thought. Because in verse 1, you see Paul's challenge regarding the believer's response to secular authority. In spite of the wickedness and the persecution, Paul commended Titus to instruct the believers, to put them in mind to be subject, to obey, if you would, the principalities, the powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. In other words, a believer was to obey human authority. Of course, the one exception would be when that authority demands that God's people violate God's command and His word. Believers were not only to be obedient, they were to be ready and eager to every good work. And that brings us to verse 2. Titus chapter 3, verse 2. Here we have the believer's testimony before his fellow men. Now, verse 1 dealt with the believer's response to human authority. Verse 2 now, the believer's relationship with his fellow man. Now, I'm going to conclude our study with this. So much more might be said, but invite you to look at verse 2, and there you're going to find 4 practical commands. 2 are negative and 2 are positive. Allow me to read. Now, instructing believers concerning their relationship with others, Titus urged God's people, quote, verse 2, to 1, speak evil of no man, 2, be no brawlers, 3, be gentle, 4, show all meekness unto all men. Now let's consider this as we close. Regardless of the ill treatment a believer might receive from others, we are not to defame, slander, malign the character of our fellow men. Nor are God's people to be brawlers. What does that mean? They're not to find themselves caught up in the midst of needless quarrels or arguments. And finally, again, verse 2, the two positive commands. The saints of God are to conduct themselves in a gentle manner, 2, showing meekness unto all men. Now, to be gentle and compassionate towards those we love is a small matter, but to do the same towards those who are inconsiderate, mean-spirited, well, that's quite another. And yet, such is the burden of believers. We are to be gentle, ready to forgive, harbor no bitterness in our hearts. And though the wicked might be brazen and offensive and looking for a fight, we as believers are commanded to respond in meekness, accepting slights with gentleness. Just a word of reminder, meekness doesn't mean you let people march over you. The literal meaning of meekness is strength under control or restraint. In other words, because we're provoked doesn't give us the right to react to that provocation. We are to be strong but gentle, meek. Well, the question I close with is, are those spiritual qualities true of you? If not, would you not seek the Lord, make right the wrongs, and then move forward in life in a godly, Christ-like manner? Thank you for joining me for this Heart of a Shepherd. God bless and bye-bye.